Okay, Jessie, I'm going to do a video for each of the 3 main kind of wedding bands that we do. That way you'll have a frame of reference more than anything. So I have pulled up on my screen the printed out version of the CAD/CAM manual you have. If you want it reprinted, no big deal. But on the first 2 pages, you have the types of settings. I'm going to start us with common prong. So there's a couple different ways these are done. This is actually a picture of the 20 stone band with and without gems. So you can see here the gems, here's without, but they're done a couple different ways. So you can see this is solid metal. You can kind of imagine that's really easily that's just a profile that's swept, but they're done a couple different ways as well. So if I'm just showing you Google images, you'll see as the diamonds get larger, the more likely it is to have kind of a scallop shape underneath, kind of like what you see in this picture. Let's see if I have some better examples. So you can see the thinner they are, the more likely they are to have a flat edge. The bigger the diamonds, the more likely they are to have this rounded edge. And the reason for that is just more physically or visually attractive. So here's, again, something a little bit bigger diamonds and that flat edge. You can kind of see it starts to look a little metally because as the diamonds get larger, the triangle here, I guess you'd call it, between the stones gets bigger. And so if you had a flat metal wall, it just looks like you have this big chunk of metal there, and it's actually prettier to have this little scallop shape. So I'm going to show you both ways to do that. So if we open up Matrix, we're going to start as always with a ring rail. And for this particular case, it can be whatever you want. Let's make this a size 7. If we go back to, I hope this isn't jumping around too much, that page here, you'll see this has pretty much all the rules that I'm going to talk about in these videos. And the reason it's printed is so that you don't have to memorize it. Eventually it will become second nature because you'll do it so much, but really all the information is here. So this is basically telling you how the prong should be, where the girdle of the gem should be. Let's see if I can make this allow us to look at both at the same time. Fantastic. So it's not necessary always to have an outside ring rail because sometimes, especially like with the gents band, they're the same height all the way around. So you would just sweep your single profile and it would stay the same all the way. But for habit's sake, let's go ahead and put one in. Oh, it did disappear. Hopefully this isn't too distracting. Oh, come on. Oh, it's not going to let me make it. There we go. At least a little bigger. That way you can kind of see both at the same time. We'll have a frame of reference there. All right. So for argument's sake, kind of making everything as consistent as possible, I'm going to do 2, 1, 7, and 1, 5. I think that's what I did. Yeah. Because that's what most rings end up being. And again, good habit to kind of have that in mind. So if we're doing something with smaller stones, so for example, most of these are, like we talked about before, using 1-3s or 1-5s. If I'm doing something like this, I'm going to go ahead, F6, and put some gems in. I'm going to make this the top, well, what am I going to do? Let's go ahead and make this the top of the curve. That way it can show you how to run a cutter as well. So for our stone size down here, let's make them 1-3s. We're basically making the 20 stone band right now, just maybe not with 20 stones. I like to hit mirror so that I know it's evenly around. Fun tip, I guess, if you didn't have an outside ring rail, if everything were or I should say, if there was no variation in height, you wouldn't have to do that because if you think about it, technically it wouldn't matter if the diamond started here and ended here because it's the same height all the way around. So we would just tilt it so that it's centered on their finger. In this particular case, it has to be centered here at the tallest point of the band. But if everything were the same height, it wouldn't matter how you built it in Matrix because the ring would be the same all the way around. I hope that's not beating a dead horse. Okay, so let's just make it go in the ballpark of halfway around. I'll leave that mirror on and right click so our gems are set. So the gem should be at least 1/2 millimeter above the ring rail. So basically what that's saying is the culet, the bottom of the stone here, should be at least 1/2 millimeter from here. match. They definitely are. If I, oh, that's a fun tool. I don't know if we've used offset. So, you know what we have? We're going to offset this line by distance 0.5. Basically, you don't want the stones, the base of the stone to come through that line. The reason why is there's going to be a little variation in depth, and when Geber goes to polish the inside of this ring, we're going to, reduce basically the gap here to here. So theoretically, you could have a stone whose diamond is like sticking out the bottom of the ring if you let it get that close. On stones this small, it's a non-issue. So our rounds at least should be 0.15 to 0.2 millimeters apart. If you look over here, this is set to 0.2 spacing, which is dead between, so we know we're good. And by the way, that's a minimum. So if I F6 and edit these gems, you'll kind of see how it'll go wider, 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 wider. It won't add another stone until it can make them at least 0.2 millimeters apart. So if you want them as close to 0.2 millimeters apart, basically you want to get to the point where it just adds a stone. Okay. So prongs should be 0.55 to 1.4 millimeters wide. This is really for like a 1 carat diamond. This is really for like a 1.3. And then you'll see here with the nudge, which again, we kind of talked about yesterday, making that 20%. So let's kind of go out. So we're looking at all the views. If I F6 those gems, I can go down to prongs. Let's see.
Their work videos.
I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. 0.55. You can see that looks good. It's about to the edge. The nudge. We're going to make that 20. Yeah, that looks good. A pretty good rule of thumb is make the height, because I think I have something down here, make the height the same size as the stone diameter. So basically, the wider it is, the taller it should be, so they match. Again, that just is one less thing to worry about, one less number. Taper slightly 0 to 5, so we have our taper here at 5, and again, that just means that it's not overly conical. So we can right click on that. And then the metal should be 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters wider than the gems on either side. So I don't know if that's worded correctly, but basically you need 0.1 to 0.2 here and 0.1 to 0.2 here. So if these are 1.3s and we're gonna add 0.2 on either side, we need the metal to be 1.7. So if we want, let's use the profile placer. Why not? We're gonna make the width 1.7. And since I'm putting the profile down here, I already know the height is 1.5. We just need to adjust the shape. So this is a little bit too round. You can kind of imagine if the stone sat here, like really this is useless metal because it's at such an angle. So let's get something that's slightly more, even like this would be acceptably square. Okay. So we're gonna select both of these lines, sweep 2, select our profile. Because it gets taller up here, its assumption is we want it to get wider, but that's not the case. So we're gonna click maintain height. And preview that, you can see it's all the same width. And you can see that looks pretty good. Okay. So there's 2 things that we need to handle now. So, well, actually one thing really, cutters. But we're actually going to use 1, 2, 3 different kinds of cutters. So we want Geber to be able to get the stone set. So you can see the girdle of the gem, that's the widest point, should sit on top of the metal. Which obviously right now it's like flush with it. We need to kind of uncover those diamonds. We need to make a hole. So azure cutters, that's that cutter that's the shape of the diamond and has a hole in the middle. And then we need basically the cutter that makes this portion, I guess, the cutout. So that's a channel cutter. So let's just go one at a time. So if you remember, our F6 shows everything we can do to those gems, including cutters. So we want an azure cutter. I don't know why gem cutter is the first choice. Azure cutter means it has a hole that goes all the way through. So what we want with these is something that extends all the way through the metal, So you have your buttons over here. Maybe we do want it to just be gem cutter. You want the depth to come all the way through the bottom of the ring so that you can clean it out. So always check here at the top where it's the deepest. You can see it should be 50 to 70% the bottom width. So if you come over here, lower seat size is what that's talking about. So this is 50. As we go to 70, do you see how that got wider? Really anywhere in between there works. The reason you might want it wider is if this metal was was super tall, this ring, it's a lot easier to clean it the wider it is. If you have a really long skinny hole, it's hard to get and drill that out for the jeweler. So I think even put that in here. They should be 50 to 70% the width, increasing as the depth increases. So in this particular case, it's pretty short, so 50% will work just fine. All right, so that's cutter number 1. I like to go ahead and hide them, and I hide them down here just because I know that's where they are. Okay, cutter number 2, we're gonna do a micro prong cutter. So that's this swoopy one, or F6, micro prong cutter. I don't know why, but its assumption is always that you want it upside down, which we don't. I don't know who would. So we want the one that's shaped like a U. So we're going to come here and click in the middle of the profile box. You can see this one's kind of V-ish. This one, that's like a perfect U. That's typically what we want. And as a general rule, we want it normally somewhere around 0 or in the negatives. So, okay, if this makes sense, the more positive the number, the skinnier it gets, and then it flips around. So if I go up to like 1, it becomes upside down. Why? I don't know. I didn't write the software. It's bad. It's bad software planning. No. Oh my God. Well, that's not good. I'm gonna pause this and then figure out what the heck went wrong. Okay, Jessie, so we're kind of caught up with where we are last time. I just rebuilt something similar really quick, so it's probably not exactly the same. But I have the Azure cutters. I'm going to hide those. All right, so we're going to go back to micro prong cutters. So if we select the gems and hit F6, I have our micro prong cutters on the CAD reference. Okay, it says that they should be a micro prong cutter that is as wide as the interior of the prongs and as deep as the halfway point between the culet and the girdle. Okay, so what that means is we want it to be as wide, like here to here. So basically you have this pretty swoop that goes up at the prong, and you want it to be, so if this is the girdle and this is the culet, you want it to be about here in depth. So again, I don't know why it starts it upside down or in this weird shape. Like, who uses that? No one uses that. So we're going to do this round sweepy thing. I like to start with my width first. So you can see if that's negative 0.5 and that's 0, and we want it somewhere in between, a lot of times I'll come in here and type like negative 0.3. Actually looks pretty good. But we're in the wrong spot. So this drop here on the far left, we'll adjust it. So if that's 0.5 and that's 0, let's try like 0.2, which looks about good. So some of this is, just kind of eyeballing. So I'm going to right click because that actually, I think that will work. Okay, so we have 2 different kinds of cutters done. And now we need to make it so that the girdle of the gem is at the top of the metal. So in this case, we're going to cut metal away. So we're going to go to F6, and now we're going to use a channel builder. So this is going to be the cutout that basically makes our niche that the diamonds sit in, if that makes sense. And for something like this, we're always going to use the square rounded. So basically what we want is we want something that cuts out just where the diamonds are. So let's close some of this up, and you can kind of see right now it has this rounded edge. We want it to be square. So up here in the top corner, we're going to go to square. We want it to come up to the girdle of the diamond, which you can kind of see there. So we go to offset. I don't know why it's called drop on the other one and offset on this one. I wish it had the same name. It doesn't, but it's the same thing. Let's start typing in numbers to get there faster. So that's pretty much where we want to be. Maybe like, yeah, that looks good. Okay. And then we obviously don't want like a weird divot. If you look back at the picture here, you can see it's as wide as the ring and it goes just past the prongs. And the reason for that is because if it's like basically the prongs are stuck in the metal now, we want Geber to be able to move them as much as possible. So let's increase the width basically until it's wider than the ring itself. So that's perfect. You can see how it comes past the green. And then we're going to increase the extension. So there's two buttons here, extension and cap. In square, it doesn't really make a difference. Cap is basically from where it says B to the end. It would make a difference if you're using one of these other shapes. Like, see, I went to sharp. You can see how now we're talking about just the triangular portion that extends with cap versus extension is the actual channel, if that makes sense. But so same thing if we're doing rounded, it would make it a longer arc or a shorter arc by adjusting that extension. In square, it's the same deal. So using whichever one you prefer, because it's the same thing. I like to make sure it's like 0.2 millimeters past the prong. So 2, 3, 4, perfect. And right click. So now we have all three kinds of cutters. Thank you, Katie, for bringing me the soda Jessie just got for me. Thank you, Jessie. Later. Okay, so now we are going to use all the cutters. So we have them here. Basically what we need is to tell the computer that we want to cut that shape away from the green. So that's going to be our Boolean command. So it shows up a couple places. It shows up in tools. It's the two blue balls. And if you don't remember that, I can't help you. So it's in tools and it's in cutters here at the very end, whichever you'd prefer. I'm sure you can type it, but it's actually pretty handy because it's right here. So their picture is pretty self-explanatory, thankfully in this case. So basically it's saying whatever you put in this box cuts what's in that box. So we're going to put green in this one because we want parts of that cut away. Instead of individually selecting these, I'm going to right click in these two boxes and see how it selects everything that's that shade, and I'm going to put it in the little arrow down here. I do advise clicking these three buttons to keep the cutter, cut them one by one, and to force it to cut it. You just have a higher success rate, and then you keep the cutter, so God forbid something happen and you have to make an adjustment to the width of the ring later, you have them handy and you can just, re-sweep it and then re-boolean it, no big deal. Okay, so this typically takes a minute because you can think about it, you can actually see it working. It's cutting that green by every single one of those pieces. But what we're going to end up with is going to look basically like this piece. Don't be upset if you can see like a little gap. If you look really close even at this picture, you can see like a little gap between the prong and the wall. Remember that when you zoom out to actual size, no one will be able to see that. All right, so let's cut off our cutters. They're still there, they're just hidden. If I zoom in here, you can see without the gems, I have a perfect little seat for Geber to put them in. You can see the green extends a little bit past the prongs, but it's kind of a nice, pretty swoopy shape, so non-issue. That's basically the 20 stone band, although I'm pretty sure this has more than 20 stones. But that's essentially how that one is done. Now, if we wanted to do something more like one of, these, what we call our 11 stone band, it has like more of a scallop shape. It's actually pretty close to this. We're going to do something a little different with the gems. So you can kind of see on these side views, basically you have your metal here, and then these are a little more square than what we like. We basically want something sitting under each gem. I'm still going to use this size sewn just to kind of show you how it can be done. So let's just turn off our green. here's where things get really cool. So on these pictures, you can see the prongs extend all the way down to the finger rail. We're just going to hit F6 on our prongs. And that's what this drop button is. And you're like, but Laura, drop on the micro prong cutter was where it was in relation to the gem. I know. They're really bad when they write this software. So let's make the drop kind of absurd. Perfect. So it goes all the way to the ring rail and then some. No big deal, because we have this cool button called cut to finger rail, which basically means if you extend anything past the finger rail, it will trim it to the right height. So that's really nice too if you're, let's say you build this ring in this size 7 and then someone comes up to you and it's like, oh, JK, they're 7 1/4, which is like such a small size difference. It's like up to here, and you're like, am I really going to rebuild this for like this 0.1 millimeter in height? Nope. You're just going to cut by that new ring rail and call it a day. Okay, so here I have our prongs. So what we need essentially is, let's see if we have good, I know it's not easy to see, but we need this piece. So that's an under bezel. So if we go to, I don't think it'll do it when they're all selected. All right, here I'm going to type in ungroup. So because these are all gems on a curve, it wants to treat them all as one thing. So they're one group. But in order to add an under bezel, we have to be able to let them see it one at a time. So I'm going to select just the one gem and hit F6. And now you'll see, oh my gosh, it's still not even in here. Oh, you turds. So let's go up to setting. So the third one over is called bezel builder. I'll put our gem in. So there's 3 different kinds of bezels. This is a full bezel, which basically means it doesn't need prongs. You're going to fold over that metal. This is being a real turd about things. It's probably the wrong size stone to use. You know what? Let's make this easier. Let's select all the blue, edit our gems on curve, and let's make them big. Let's make them 2 millimeters each. Perfect. And then now you can see our prongs were just a little too small. Let's adjust those. Bam. And you know what we're going to do now? Just trim it to the whatever. You can see how fast that was to adjust. Thank you, F6. Those prongs are honestly even a little big. Let's not sweat that in the moment because we're not worried about that. All right, let's go up to bezel builder. See if it'll, select only one. So we're gonna have to ungroup. Put that in the little section here. Okay, so this means basically you don't need prongs. We're just gonna have metal all the way around the diamond. This is something that sits below the diamond, and this is this would be like, what's a good example? This is basically like something that would go on a head. So let's see if I can find. Okay, that's not super easy to see, but if you look really closely, you can see this little white bar here. That's what that is. As you can see, it's a little more round. It's not as substantial. We're looking for something a little bit, there it is again here. We're looking for something a little bit heavier than that. We want this middle one. So you can see it's a little bit more structured. And basically what we're going to do, we're going to make it as tall as it needs to be to go all the way down to the finger rail. There's 2 ways to handle this. If you look, this is not a great view. If you kind of look here, you can see it's asking me a couple different measurements. Basically, we want to make a little seat for that diamond. So you can see as I pull this out, it kind of sits there. If you didn't want to do that, no big deal. Just go back to our cutters and cut this purple part by the gem cutter. No big deal. In this particular case, we're going to go ahead and take care of that. Same rule applies for polishing metal on the bezels as it does for the metal. So remember, we like to have about 0.2 millimeters extra. So here, that's called scale. So basically, how how big should the bezel be in comparison to the diamond. So I'm going to make it like 115%, and that's about 0.1 millimeters. If you wanted to be really careful, you could measure it. Here's a little adjuster for that too. And now that I've adjusted it, I can bring this in. So again, you can kind of see in this view, it's making its little seat. Okay, so that looks great, but most of the time it still has that pretty little micro prong cutter like swoop shape to it. So what I'm gonna do, I could cut this one by the micro prong, and I could do this for every single one of these diamonds, but that sounds pretty exhausting. So what I'm gonna do in this case, well, so there's two ways I can do it. I can do match attributes and go ahead and put all the bezels in, or I could go ahead and do the cutter and then do match attributes and tell all these I want its cutter and its bezel. What I think I'm gonna do is just grab all the blue and do a micro prong cutter, so you can kind of see how it needs to be a hair wider and a little bit lower. So there are controls here, but sometimes there's this middle width one. It'll actually make it, see how this is? It'll like make it pinch in the middle. We don't want that. So on these, I tend to find it's easier to use what's down here. Why did -0.5 make it wider? I can't answer that. It's bad software. I'll make this like a little taller. There we go. So it's like kind of halfway between the girdle and the culet, about the width of the inside of the prongs. Okay, I'm gonna hide those, and now I'm gonna grab every single gem that doesn't oh, by the way, that what I did there is I hit Control to unselect something. Shift and click means keep selecting. Okay, so I've selected everything but the one that already has the under bezel, and I'm gonna hit match attributes, go here. I just need the bezel. I already have micro prong cutters on all these, and I already have prongs on all of those. So in this case, I just want the bezel. And look at that. How beautiful is that? All the bezels just showed up. This would be when it's a good time to have these as separate colors, so that you can easily select all the bezels to Boolean it. If you hadn't done that, you could just click them one at a time while holding down Shift, but why bother? Okay, so we're going to go up to Boolean, which again will be in our history here, or we can go to cutters, and it'll be handy dandy right there. So we're going to select all the purple, and we're going to cut it by the orange. And again, I'm just right clicking in that box to select everything that color, and then do the Boolean. And look at that. I'm going to shade it. So again, you have that kind of pretty swoopy shape like what we saw elsewhere. And then when you look down, you still have that pretty scallopy shape. So then at that point, all you need is the ring down here. So there's a couple different ways you could do it. You could do exactly what we have here from this old profile. I could sweep to, maintain the height. And then I could cut it where these prongs are. Yep. Kind of like this. I could just split it. And then what I would do is I would get rid of all this orange. I'd select basically that at the top. And that works pretty well. The other thing I could do would be to add a profile here and here and sweep it. That would do literally the exact same thing. It's personal preference at that point, but now we have a common prong ring that's scalloped. And let's make all these one color, so that's okay, one ring. So I have this is our, well, it's our old one for different stone size, but you kind of see we had that with the prongs that wasn't scalloped, or we have this one that is scalloped. So a lot of times you'll hear my dad talk about the 11 stone band. It's set like this. The 20 stone band is the one that's set like this. But either way, you have a common prong band. And just remember, if you ever need to look up, you know, how to do that, most of the information is here on types of setting for common prong, bead set, and you can see fishtail. Fishtail is basically the same thing, except we do this a little different now. This still has basically the same single prong, and then we were having the jeweler split it, but now we're just using that like 2 prongs in between each one, like the 2 little ones, because it looks the same, honestly. But we're not going to worry about that on this round. All right.